share my screen. Okay. Notice Adam Ariel is on the line, so I want to start by thanking Adam for a really beautiful article he sent to me on this subject, which was much better than my prep, honestly. And so I'm gonna use his material a lot. So I'm gonna share the screen now. I hope all of you can see the screen in coming now. Okay, now you should all be able to see my screen. And if you, I'm not going to be able to, for now, I'm not going to try anything fancy. So I probably can't see I can see the chat. Good. Can I see that? Right. So if you have any questions, you can write them on the chat, or you can, which you see, everyone will see it because I'm sharing my screen, or you can just ask your questions. But if you're not asking a question, please mute yourself. Okay, so let's start the class now, actually, right? So this is how many Parshiyot should be Lein the Shabbat after quarantine. We'll see that because it's Vayakal Pekude this week, so the answer to that question might change after this week that it had in previous weeks. What I don't want to reach a firm halachic conclusion, because I think this is the kind of issue that's going to have to be left very clearly to every synagogue. So what I want to do really here is intellectual history, and the intellectual history will perhaps have an impact on what you think the halacha should be, and you'll probably have a clear sense at the end of what I think, how I would paskin, which is not the same as saying what everyone else should do. So we're going to start with the Zohar, which we'll treat as a text of indeterminate date. The interesting thing about the Zohar is that whatever you think it started, it doesn't seem to have made it into the halachic conversation through the normal channels that you would expect the Zohar to make it into it. So we have to figure out whether that means that we're misunderstanding it or not. So here's what the Zohar says. Asir le'laman dekari be'oraisa lemifsak parshasa o afila miluchada. Okay, so somebody who's reading the parsha, right, can't be posek a parsha. That probably means one of the parshiyot, astumot and psuchot, or afila miluchada, or even to cut. And I think here lemifsak means to cut, even one word, or could mean to cut a word in half. I don't think so. Ela batar de pasak Moshe parshaso lama kadisha yafsik. This is a rewrite of the halachic statement that you can't stop in the middle of one of the ptuchot and stumat that Moshe Rabbeinu said. That's not what matters to us. Now he says v'lo yafsik milin de parshasa de shabsa da de parshasa de shabsa achra. The words of one parsha of one Shabbos, right? So now we're not talking about stumat and ptuchot. Now we're talking presumably about the parshiyot for laning. So the words of the parsha of one Shabbos should not interfere with the words of another parsha. Razada, what is the secret of that? B'shata de ifsiku parshion, in the time when the parshiyot, again, presumably the parsha of Shabbos, were divided. Kol chad v'chad is atra v'kaime kame kutshabrichu. Each one put on their crown and stood in front of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kevan dashlim lemifsakani parshayin dechol shata. When they were all divided, is atran kame kutshabrichu v'amre. They all stood in front of God and said, "Anam Shabbos ploni, Anam Shabbos ploni." They each of them identified themselves as a member of a particular Shabbos. Vayishata, right? So God calls Yofiel, right, who's in charge of everything, and 53 chariots, and they're each appointed, right? They're each appointed. Lahayritchal parsha saplanya, the Shabbos planya. Each of them is appointed by its own parsha. The chol chad v'chad misham shel oraisa dehavu Shabbos delay, and each of them serves the Torah of that parsha. Ve'asir lan la'arva ailin balin v'la'ala reticha berticha dechavrei. Right, and they can't interfere with each other. Afilu kimlonima, right? Even the smallest, the closest a bit. Afilu b'chad teva, even one word, or afilu b'osachar, or even one letter. And each one is kema de pasik lana kodesh baruch hu, as God had as a portion to them. V'kama de manilan, kama de manilan b'inun parshan kol chad v'chad al mitrei, and the way He appointed them, each on each parsha, each one on its own mishmeret. Okay, so that's about the strongest possible statement you can have, that there is an absolute connection between the parsha you're supposed to read on Shabbos and the Shabbos. And in the Zohar's universe, presumably, one can argue at least, it doesn't make any sense to think about making up laning, because each laning is assigned to each Shabbos, and you mess things up if you lane one parsha in the other. Now, maybe that's better than skipping. Okay, you could argue that missing a Shabbos is still worse than having one interfere with the other. But that's not usually the way Kabbalah works. Usually, my amateur impression is that Kabbalah usually cares a lot about order and more about order than skipping. And the model is how you whether you make up the Psukkah de Zimra after if you went out of order to miss them or not. But here we have a clear model that seems to think that laning is a matter of this parsha for this Shabbos. On the other hand, if you look at the Rambam, who's just one of many ways of resolving a fundamental problem in Sugyot, he says, Moshe Rabbeinu tikein l'am Yisrael shu korin b'Torah b'Rabim b'Shabbos uv'sheni v'chamishi b'Shachris. Right. So Moshe Rabbeinu set up laning 3 times a week. That's the way the Rambam has it in the morning. Kidei shlo yishu shloshes yamim lo shmias Torah. So they shouldn't go 3 days without hearing Torah. Ve'ezra tikein shu korin came mincha b'chol Shabbos mishum yoshvei kronos. And Ezra added Shabbos afternoon because people waste their time Shabbos afternoon if you don't have something for them to do. And Ezra also adds in that the minimum amount of laning on Monday and Thursday. So you have 2 separate takanas. One is the Rambam, one is Ezra. Sorry, one is Moshe Rabbeinu and one is Ezra. The way the Rambam sets it out, Moshe Rabbeinu establishes 3 days a week, and Ezra adds Shabbos afternoon and adds the amount. Another way of reconciling it is to claim that Moshe just sets up Shabbos morning and Ezra sets up the other 3 times a week. Each of these have their own difficulties. For me, what's most striking in the Rambam is that he never mentions anything about what you have to lane on Shabbos. Later on, we'll discover that there's 7 kruim, but there's no mention of what Moshe Rabbeinu was mitakein at all. Not even the minimum amount that Ezra sets up for the others. And that seems, right, the vision we have here. So, right, the Zohar sets it up that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu assigns each parsha to each Shabbos. But I don't know when he does it, because it doesn't seem to have been done before Moshe Rabbeinu, and it doesn't seem to have been done by Moshe Rabbeinu. So this gives us a very different impression, and that also, of course, is enhanced by a historical thing that you're probably all aware of, which is Bnei Marava Damaski L'Raisa B'Tlas Shinin, that in Israel, they did not have a 1-year completion of the Torah cycle. They had a 3-year completion of the Torah cycle. And that seems to suggest that however the original takana was set up, finishing the Torah in a year was not a primary goal. And we also know that there are other places where they broke up various other Parshiyot, Mishpatim in particular, depending on local customs. So the Zohar's notion of this absolute connection between the laning of one Shabbos set out in advance and that particular Shabbos devised in advance of the year seems not to be followed, not to be supported by the earlier literature. But okay, we have our 2 visions, right? One is the Zohar, which says that there's something special about laning for this Shabbos. Another is where there's something important about laning on Shabbos, but it doesn't seem to matter very much what it is that we lane. You have you have not here, I should say, mentioned either in the Zohar or in the Rambam any idea that you absolutely have to finish the Torah in a year. The Gemara says that in Israel they finished it every 3 years. So it could be that whatever the cycle is, you have an obligation to finish it completely, or it could be that that to avoid boredom and to avoid the impression that some parts of Torah are more important than others, they just set it up that there was a cycle. But we can tell that they're not really terribly devoted to the cycle because after all they break it for Yom Tovim. So it's not an idea that the Torah has to be absolutely in order. And it's not necessarily an idea of a completion either. It's just that there had to have some way of setting it up, and to leave something out would have been poor thinking. Okay, that's our very broad background. That you have a Zohar hanging in the background which really believes in this connection, but that the other frameworks we have so far don't seem to suggest that there's any necessary significance to any of the laning at all. And what we can argue is that both of these models militate against any kind of repetition. For the Zohar, it's wrong to repeat, and for the Rambam, it's pointless to repeat, because the whole point is to lane on Shabbos. And if you do a longer laning this Shabbos, okay, you did a longer laning this Shabbos. It has nothing to do with the question of whether you lane last Shabbos. For the whole purpose was just to make sure that there was Torah. right? Whether because of Torah once every 3 days or because Moshe Rabbeinu originally set it up as once a week. Okay, all that sort of changes when an incident happens in Vienna. The Arzarua, I see multiple dates. So he was born somewhere between 1180 and 1200 and died somewhere between 1200 and 1270. And you can locate him approximately. If anyone has more accurate information that they're confident of, they can include that. Okay, 1 second. No. Okay. Fine. Okay. Okay. So before I stop the road, I just want to do one thing. I apologize for a sec. I apologize. Okay, we're back on. Yeah. Okay, so here is the Order. So he says Masahaya Colonia. So there's a thing that happened, I believe it's in Cologne. Be'echad shekaval the Shabbat haroi likrot parshat amor lakohanim. So they had a habit where people could issue protests against something happening in the community before laning, and somebody issued this protest before laning, during before in Parshat Emor, and he stopped the laning the entire day. Kriyas utfila kol hayom. Okay, right. So he completely stopped laning. Ushigia Shabbos haba. So when the next Shabbos came, Siva Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimshon Zatzal. So Eliezer Rabbi Shimshon, about whom I cannot find anything at all other than he lived around that time and it was probably a paitan, declared Latchil beParshat Emor lakonim likrota v'gam b'Har Sinai haryali karot b'ota Shabbat. So the next Shabbos, he ordered that they lane both Parshiyot, starting from where they left off. Not that you lane this week's Parsha, then you go back and lane last week's Parsha, but that you lane both Parshiyot in order. V'shelo l'daleg, probably this page stands for Parsha, Parsha Echad min HaTorah, that you shouldn't leave anything out of the Torah. Lifi kimimos Moshe Rabbeinu nitkan likros HaTorah b'farshi yoseha ulahashlima b'chol shana v'shana. So he has a different vision. In the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a decree to read the Torah by Parsha and to finish it each year. Okay, so he's obviously adopting the Babylonian practice and claiming the Babylonian practice of finishing a year goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he claims that this is the rabbinic takana, right? Because he thinks that there's an idea that every year the people should hear all the mitzvot in the Torah. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimshon says you have to lane both Parshiyot in order because you're not allowed to skip. Okay, now he says Ve'in l'chalomar kivan shavar zman kriyata halchalo ota parsha. Don't say that. Look, it's time passed, and now that parsha's gone. Now I think you'll see this won't show up again apparently until the Gra, but I think that his language here is borrowed from the language of Arz Mano Batel Karbano, of Arz Mano Batel Tfilato, of Karbano and davening. And he says you might think that there's a set time for laning this parsha, which is on Shabbos. Nope, that's wrong. Right? Lefi ki ein kevav parsha likros parsha zu b'shabazu v'zu b'shabazu ela ki chein nistra haparshiyot. Okay, so you can't have a more anti-Zohar notion than that. That the whether he's before or after, there is no order to read the parshiyos on this Torah, on this Shabbos or that Shabbos. It just happened to work out this way. Okay, so this is a very creative measure because he claims that there is a takana. That you have to lane it by parsha, and you have to lane it every Shabbos. But the purpose of the takana is that you have to lane the whole Torah during the year, and therefore if you missed one, you can make it up. Now, presumably, he doesn't think that a shul could decide, we're only going to meet once a month, so let's meet once a month and deliberately, or let's, because we want to get to Kiddush earlier most weeks, so let's skip laning 3 weeks and put it and lane on the 4th week. After all, that way we're still fulfilling the takana. So this is a very difficult position to sustain. That there's an overall takana, and the overall takana can be filled whenever week you want, because after all, no one really cares what you lane as long as you finish. Okay, and he has a really peculiar there's a couple of riots for this. One of them is really peculiar. The first riot to this is that is that we lay on Shabbos, right? And when Shabbos comes out, then we just make everything work out the way it does. So that's okay. When Shabbos comes on Yom Tov, we skip. So that seems to suggest there's no real connection. And all right, so that's fine. That's perfectly reasonable. Then he says a really weird right. He says even if you were to say that there is a keva on Shabbos in Kriyas Parshiyos, meaning you're supposed to lay in this parsha now. Nonetheless, he says you're still not going to push it aside. Why? Because the Shir Shel Yom, if you don't say the Shir Shel Yom on Shabbos because it's because of one of the days when it's not supposed to be, then you push it off and you push the Shir Shel Yom one day out, and in the end you miss the last. Sorry, if one of the Shir Shel Yom is supposed to say on Yom Tov gets missed because it's Shabbos, you push it off and you just skip the last one. So that tells you when you have some kind of order, you start from where you left off and you just skip the last one. So don't tell me that you lost this parsha, because really, if you thought the parshas were fixed, what you would really do is lane last week's parsha. And what we should do is we should keep laning a parsha behind the whole year. Okay, right. That I have to say is an utterly wild, right? That he tries to say how that doesn't, why here we shouldn't skip it. Really, really wild, raya. Now he says, "Ve'ein lomar," right? And this is, I think, is a much more compelling point. "Ve'ein lomar she'ein likrot mishum torach tzibur." Don't say you're not supposed to read because it's just too much of a pain that for the congregation to listen to two lanings. Damrina memesechah sofrim she'afilu bavur pasuk echad chozer v'korei kol haparsha k'defrish Yisrael v'lo cheshina mishum torach tzibur. We said if you skipped even one pasuk in laning, then you go back and read the whole laning. So v'chol shekain the whole parsha she'ein lochush l'torach tzibur kasher no'osim b'rov parshas she'nekarim shtayim biachad geshem merubim al shabbos hashanim. And he says, secondly, we often lane double parshiyot. So don't tell me because of torach tzibur that you can't do it. Okay, and then he has an interesting line. He says v'kach hi mitzvah min hamuvchar. Okay, at this point, I'm happy that people unmute themselves and tell me, what do you think is his mitzvah min hamuvchar? Any suggestions? No? Okay. It's not clear to me either. But one possibility, it seems to me, and I think the most likely possibility, as far as I can see at this stage, is that he tells you that everything that he's talking about is just a mitzvah min hamuvchar. Right? That you don't have to lane it again, even though Rabbi Lezer Bar Shimshon, back up here, Lezer Bar Shimshon did order them to lane again, but he thinks that it's not an obligation; it's just a mitzvah min hamuvchar to lane it again. That seems to me to be the simplest reading of the simplest reading of it. Other explanations would be that it's a mitzvah min hamuvchar somehow relates to the to the notion of laning double parshiyot when there's enough. I don't really understand how that would fit, but I'm open to being challenged on that. So what do we get from the Order Road generally? If you skip a parsha, it's at least a mitzvah hamuvchar to go do it again, because there's a premise that Moshe Rabbeinu set out an idea of finishing the Torah each year, for which he doesn't really have much support. He gets rid of the idea of Avar Zman Kriyasa by saying that there's really no seder to each parsha, which again is a creative notion to say that they're separate takanot, and it really doesn't matter what you learn in any Shabbos, even though you have to learn every Shabbos. Could be, right? There is a position later that says that really we could break it up randomly whenever we want, as long as we make it fit in the end. And as for Torach Tzibur, his proof about Torach Tzibur is that we lane double parshiyot sometimes, and that's a very good proof. His proof that from Masechet Sofrim, however, that we go back because you skip a parsha, that's not very impressive at all, because it might be that's a punishment. You allowed a mistake in laning to happen, or it could be that that's a corrective. You might think that pasuk's really not in the Torah, right? You've created a misimpression, So you get a misimpression, you have to go back and correct it. That makes sense. That seems to me, a very strong position, but it doesn't necessarily lead that if you missed a parsha, no one thinks that parsha is not in the Torah. You just didn't have Lenin that week. It's not a mistake, right? So you're not reifying a mistake if you skip a partial Lenin. So that proof doesn't seem to me very strong at all. So we have really is a good proof that double Parshiyot are not considered tircha de tzibura, and a very creative notion that you're supposed to make up Parshiyot, which in the end he says is a mitzvah min hamuvchar. None of this pays any attention to what actually happened in Colonia, right? We could leave aside all the theoretical superstructure and say, okay, here's a rabbi who's faced with a situation where somebody was mevatel the kriyas haTorah, and now the next Shabbos you have to figure out what to do about the right when this person was mevatel the kriyas haTorah, and if you skip it, there are probably going to be people who are angry at him forever, and if you say we're going to do it dafka because we can't let people prevent us from learning Torah, so you're going to have people mad at him because he's making them learn a double parsha. So the best way out is to say, well, there's some kind of chiyuv to redo it, and that way the person isn't responsible for missing the whole parsha, but it's not, it's not trying to satisfy the dafkaniks. It's really a chiyuv. So it might be that this is a good way of navigating the problem, and we don't have such a we don't have to be so convinced by his arguments. I, frankly, am not terribly convinced by his arguments, but the Or Zarua seems to be, as far as we know, the first person on record we have addressing the question, although it's very unlikely that he is the first time in history that anybody ever skipped laning. He doesn't, in his tshuva, address the question of why it was that you missed laning. He assumes his reality, and you don't know whether he would have paskin differently if instead of being the result of a single person holding up the entire community, in which he might say there's the community's fault for not addressing it. He might say it's particular's fault. All sorts of reasons that case might be unique. You don't know what he would say if, for example, they were required to evacuate because of floodwaters, or if all their Sefer Torah were apostle. We have no way of knowing. Okay. The Or Zarua is summarized in the Sefer Haggadah as follows: the Sefer Or Zarua in bitlu b'Shabbos hatame. That's the expression for what happens if you, if the person complaining prevents you from going through I think it's going through any part of the tefillah. It might be referring specifically to the laning. I'm not sure. Below karu parsha, yikru b'parshas haba shtei parshios. Okay, so this is a deep, this is a very high concept thing. It leaves out all the details. It leaves out all the arguments. I don't know if it's specific to the idea of the way in which bitlu atame refers specifically to the complaint, or whether it applies in any circumstances at all. The Mari Weil, as you can see, we're moving on in time. Right now we're in the 15th century. Rival says be'erfort haya hakahal becherem shel hagalachos. So there's some kind of priest put an interdict on the community. The Shabbos Parshas Naso shelo karo asidra, right? And therefore they didn't read the parsha. The Shabbos Parshas B'haloscha tzivisi likros Naso v'haloscha. So there again, the Marival insists that they read the two parshas, presumably beginning with last week's parsha, to make up. And he says, I have a copy of a tshuva. Right, so he's following right? So he follows the Or Zarua, and he thinks his circumstance, where the church prevents him from laning, is the same as the Or Zarua circumstance in which the person complaining prevented them from laning, and that would give us, at this point, we would say that we have a pretty straightforward record that if you miss 1 week as and we have two circumstances, you miss 1 week either because of an internal community dispute or because of an external decree, the solution is make it up the next week, beginning with the parsha from last week. And at this point, nobody has suggested any reason why this would be a bad idea. I've explained why it's a good idea, except for Tircha Tzibura, which is a weak answer because you have double Parshiyos all the time. So it might this might just be a safety measure. This is the best thing among all things. It might just be a mitzvah min hamufchar, so far as we know. Okay, the other issue we have is again in the 15th century, another case comes up, and this is the Maharam Mintz, and here's his case. Masha Alta Almasa Sheira Kal Kadosh Vurmj. Shabbos Parshas Chodesh Shiva Yakel Pekude. Right. So here, right. This is something that should be very familiar to us. Shiva Yakel Pekude Bechorem Lekros Yachad. Right. So basically, this past Shabbos, they couldn't. V'nikru Shisha Gavri Kedina, and they called up 6 aliyahs and everything went great. Ukeshachazan Kore Hashvi Lahashlim Hasefer. But when the Chazan called up Shvi for Shvi Chazak, Nafal Tagar Ben Shnei Gavra. Sefer Torah Munachas Betela. So 2 people fought about who gets called up for Shvi, and the fight goes on to the point everybody just leaves the Sefer Torah there. No one knows what happened. We don't know what caused the fight. Who's right? Who's wrong? Could be Kamsa Bar Kamsa, whole gamut. Okay. Jared, do you have a question or? No, okay. Okay. V'nimshach zeh keneged base shows. This goes on for 2 hours. They can't, right? They can't figure out who do, right? Who, right? Or figure out a way to make them settle. So everybody leaves. They take a different Sefer Torah out of the Aron Kodesh. And they go to the teen minyan, Shakar and Sumrash. The Sham Karu Shvi, and they laid Shvi there. V'ishlimu hasedra kidikunim. Everything's finished there. The Nishar b'veis hakneses shel ir rak dal dohei anashim osem balei machlokas v'tzirafa. So the few people who are involved in the fight, right? The few people who are involved in the fight, they're the ones who they're the ones who who stay in shul, and everyone else leaves and lanes somewhere else. Okay, but guess what? That was a new fight. Now we're trying to do, what are we going to do this Shabbos? Some people want to lane all 3 Parshiyos this coming Shabbos. And their explanation is not the Zohar. Their explanation is not that we have to finish laning for the year. What they say is, look, everybody but those 5 people left in shul laned, and they heard all of the Torah, but they didn't finish in that shul. They didn't finish with that Sefer Torah. They used this different Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah Rishona Piguma. So that insults the first Sefer Torah. It looks like the first Sefer Torah was puzzle. So they have a special thing. Every shul has to finish the laning with the Sefer Torah that it starts from. If it doesn't do that, then then you have to make it up. Okay, you can imagine this was not a very popular position in shul. 3 Parshiyos, we all heard it anyway, and it's just because you guys had a fight. The Ode, okay, there's another position. Hashahiyah ben Shishel Shvi have Yoser Michdei Ligmoris Kula. Okay, right, so this is a very, very clever answer. It took you guys too long to lay in Shvi, and if you look at Kriyas HaTorah as a single thing, so you have halacha by tefillah, that if you have a break in your davening long enough that you could have done the whole davening, then you have to start over. So maybe the same thing's true by Kriyas HaTorah. So the rest of you weren't Yotzei Shvi either. So they have 2 reasons that they want, right? And he says, what about Megillah? Yeah, maybe Kriyas HaTorah is more common than Megillah. Megillah we make last forever. Kach das HaShoel. Okay, it seems to be pretty clear the Shoel is one of the people who stayed in shul and feels really bad about missing laning. And so he has come up with 2 interesting reasons to make them lane the whole parsha over for him. Right? One is, after all, you didn't lane it from this Torah, and this Torah is going to look bad. And number 2, that you guys weren't Yotze anyway because you took too long. Okay, really not compelling. V'yesh data noteh, the V'day b'zeh she'ishlim kriyas Torah b'beis hakneses shel habachurim, l'chein ein tzarich likro v'lachzor v'yakel pekudim v'yikra b'Shabbos haba. And some people say, no, what we did over there was enough, and there aren't enough of you left to make a minyan to be chayiv anyway. So, right, so we were satisfied. It seems like everybody concedes in the question that if they hadn't finished Shvi somewhere else, if they had left the Parsha unfinished, that they would have to finish the laning now. It's just because every individual or even the whole community packed up and finished the laning somewhere else that you might think you might not have to. Okay, if anybody who's not muted and doesn't have a question should please mute themselves. Okay, so that's so far the question, but the Marim Mintz gives a very different answer. He says, nearly, the ein likros b'Shabbos haba v'yakel pekude, rak matchil sedra de shavua dehu v'yikra mikama tamim. He says, I don't think this is correct. I think you should just lane this week's laning. First of all, he says, you claim they weren't Yotzei Shvi, that's ridiculous. And he has his own interesting analogy. By shofar, we say that if you hear 9 tekiyos in 9 shows, you're Yotzei. So Kriyas Torah is like shofar. There's no time limit. Right? We can say Mishaberachs for all of for an hour between each aliyah. What difference does it make? Okay, that's his first answer. Okay, second answer, he says, he says, where do you get this idea? Now here he doesn't really understand the shul. The shul thinks that the shul, in this shul, has an obligation to finish laning, maybe. He says, I don't understand. If everybody in shul leaves and lanes somewhere else, what does it have to do with the place? And he goes back to shofar. By shofar, you don't have to be in the same place to hear shofar. So that doesn't make any sense. And he says, if you're talking about a claim that the Sefer Torah is peguma, that's ridiculous. We're going to lane from the same Sefer Torah this week without any corrections. So that's it, right? So that's an absurd reason. That's an absurd reason also. Okay, and secondly, he says everyone knows that they were having a fight about who got the lane. They're having a fight about who got the lane, or at least who got the aliyah. Obviously, everybody thought the Sefer Torah was fine. So he gets rid of all the Shoel's reasons to make you lane again, and I think he's absolutely right about that. It makes no sense at all. But now he says, what do you want to say?
So I wasn't here for the earlier sources, but was it clear in the other sources that they were dealing with a case where there were like multiple shoals? Is this the first one we've seen, or I don't know?
No, the Orzarua was dealing with a case where there's only one. So where there's only one shul we know about, and nobody left. Right in the Orzarua, somebody got up and complained. That's his right. Right, or her right. Right, that the nature of the medieval community was that you could stop davening if you had a complaint. So the whole community was stopped. So it could be, there's no necessary conflict between so far, because you could agree over there, right? Over there, you have to lane again because over there, the community never finished laning, never even got to laning, and over here, right? Yeah, entirely possible to distinguish. So we'll see is that the Maramins never, the Maramins didn't see the Orzarua. He only saw the summary of the Orzarua. So I have to figure out whether if he had seen the whole Orzarua, that would have changed anything. Okay. Okay, so now here's what he says. He says, Amina, here's what I said. And this is the Maramins coming in. I think even if they had never gone to the Tinyan, they just finished after 6 aliyos. They didn't finish their obligation of laning on that Shabbos. Now, that seems to assume that there is an obligation to lane a particular amount on Shabbos. I'm not convinced by that either. But we could say maybe he means is they only laned 6 aliyos and you have a chiyuv to have 7 aliyos on Shabbos. Mikol makom ein shayach likros b'Shabbos haba gimel sidros vayakel pekude im vayikra. He says, but nobody's going to say you lane 3 parshas. Why? Ki din ze lo masinu ki im b'sefer Orzarua. He says because this whole idea that you might ever have to repeat laning, that only comes from the Orzarua. Nobody previously that he knows of ever said you should. Nobody has said the other way around, but nobody ever addressed the idea of making up parshas, which is quoted by the Aguda, and it says as follows: "The Orzarua and bitlu b'Shabbos hatamid lo karo parsha, az yikru b'Shabbos haba shnei parshas." So it only says rakim bitel b'Shabbat b'Shabbat echad hatamid. This should be probably a bet. Az yikru b'Shabbat haba shnei sidros v'lo kasev mitel gimel odalid. So he has a very miduyak reading of the Aguda's citation of the Orzarua, that he only said this because it's one parsha and he wouldn't have said it if it were more Parshiyot. Okay, if we look at the whole tshuva, maybe not, right? He does get rid of the idea of tirchot tzibura on the grounds that we have double Parshiyot. We don't know if he would think that triple Parshiyot were that much worse than double Parshiyot. You might think it depends on how long the Parshiyot are, right? If you have Vayelech Nitzavim Hazinu, that's not a big deal relative to Kisisa, right? So I don't know if he had actually seen the Or Zarua, if he would have said that. The Chen
Can I ask a
Mistabra,
question?
sure.
No one's addressing anything special about Parshas HaChodesh. Is there a special chiyuv that's different?
That's a fair question. He doesn't address laning. I think that everyone assumes that Parshas HaChodesh is connected to his Shabbos, and there's no point making it up.
Okay.
I think so. I don't know for sure. Okay, V'chein Mistabra. He says it makes sense. His interpretation of the Or Zarua makes sense. Dim lo kain ein la davar sof, because if not so, it's infinite. How many parshios could you ever have to? Could you have to lane? Right. So that's an interesting argument. Now, it's not in the sof. The most you'd have to lane is 52 parshiot. You could try and make it right so that you also presumably, pardon?
54?
54 parshiot. Okay, thank you. Depends which way you count the doubles, I suppose. And anyway, presumably it would restart at Simchas Torah, right? If you're going with the idea that that you have to finish the laning in a year, so after a year, presumably it doesn't. But okay, his argument is that there comes a point at which it's implausible because of Tirchot Tzibura. There's only so many parshiot you're going to lane. So it seems to him what he really says. So here's what I say: he really doesn't understand why you lane 2, except he says, okay, 2 isn't such a Tirchot Tzibura. Because 2 isn't such a tirchot tzibura, therefore you can lane 2, but certainly not more. He says me'ata sheksas kasha mashayach lasos chatzi takanas, right? Also, right. So I think it's ein l'davar sof me'ata. I'm not really sure how to read this line, but I think what he's saying is that if you let more than 2 there be right, there would be you go on forever. On the other end, he says you might think like, what's the point of laning 2 parshiot if you missed 5? Raka mar dafka Shabbos achas lema shtei Shabbos gimel, right? But he says 1 as opposed to 2 or 3. Right? He should have said 2 or 3. Why does he say 1? It must be that he that he thinks that you only lane 1. Okay, it's not much of a proof at all, I don't think, because the reason he said 1 is because it happens to be the case in Colonia, and he was summarizing the outcome of the case of the Or Zarua. So I think the Maharam Mintz is less compelling as a reading of the Or Zarua. Maybe you could fit it in, and more compelling as a common sense svara. And I think that what you can probably say is that he thought you shouldn't really make it up at all, but he had a precedent he couldn't get out of, which is the Or Zarua said make up 2. So he make up 1. So he said, okay, make up 1. And now he's going to look up every other way of limiting that. He says, l'chein nirali, the dafka shnei sedros yikra achad mispat l'kriyas b'Shabbos, only 2 parshios, because came with the lav hachim asinu lifamim shekorin beis sedros b'Shabbos achas. Right, there are years in which we lane, right, with no leap year, then we lane double parshios. Aval nispatel beis Shabbosos ein korin b'Shabbos haba gimel sidros. We never find laning 3. What happens about when we lane a maftir which is longer, which is a quite long maftir? Shkalim say, no. Okay, he's still right. He's drawing a reasonable but arbitrary line. Okay, so now he says, Im kain hachi uvda didan, in our case, Im basa likros mashal nikra b'Shabbos of shavar. If we were to lane, we didn't lane last week. It's Tzarech Likros Gimel Sidros Vayakol Pekudim Vayikra. So this will be too long because Vayakol Pekudim was a double parsha, and for our purposes, laning a double parsha is the same as laning 2 missed weeks. Now that's not obvious in the Or Zarua. The Or Zarua could easily have said, and the language of the Or Zarua says, you missed 1 Shabbos, then you lane the next Shabbos. But he comes up with this clever idea. That was only because the Shabbos they missed was a single was a single parsha. But if the Shabbos they missed had been two parshios, or for that matter, if the upcoming Shabbos is two parshios, that would violate the no more than two parshios rule. Bezelo masinu. And therefore he says nobody thinks that we should lane Gimel Sidros this week. Okay, that's a very weak link. Better in the summary than in the original, but still a very big week. Okay. Okay. Okay, right. So that's his solution here. Okay. Okay. Now he says, right. Then he goes to the whole question. Maybe you'll say that they're that Vayakal Pekude are counted as one sedra. No, that's not right. That's not the same. You can't divide. You can't divide them. And then he has a new idea. The ode. There's another difficulty here. Kevin the Pekude have a siyam hasefer. Okay, so here he has a new creative idea. Right? His new creative idea is that you can't lane from two different svarim of chumash in one Shabbos. Okay, why not? Absolutely no idea why not. But he seems to think that there is such a thing that you can't do. He says, and our minhag, where we say that when you have two parshios together, then one person lanes across the parshios, right? The revi goes across the parshios, and this is v'yafi minhagenu kadesh l'hafsik ben sidra l'sidra, and this is a really good minhag. Kadesh lo nirak ilu chad sidra, so it won't look like one sidra. Who cares? Im kain kikarin hacha pekudi avikra. Yes. Sorry. Right.
Maybe he's getting like not skipping between books from like skipping around in Navi, which you're not allowed to do.
We do it.
But
we do, right?
that's because of skipping, so it doesn't really make sense that you can't keep reading in the same.
Yeah.
Like
I don't know. When you get to the idea of claiming that we have this, that it depends on our minhag that that revi goes across both sidros to show it's not the same sidra, and now we're gonna mess that up. Like, we're really right. Where did I get the idea that matters in the slightest? I think that's really, really, really uncompelling. I gotta say, I am wholly unconvinced by this. Argument. Okay. Then he says, look, and we also have this minhag of saying chazak. Since we have this minhag of saying chazak, so that obviously it would make no sense to say chazak and then to lane something else, and that's the end of it. Okay. I have to say that if you were to bet on it, if you were looking at this from a purely pragmatic perspective, you would say the Orzaru is in a situation where probably the best way to resolve the fight in the community is to make them lane it again, because the people who are the dafkaniks are the one who didn't hear and they're insisting, okay, we'll lane one sedra again, we'll create communal peace. And the Mara Mintz is facing a situation where where they're gonna make them lane three parshas. Everyone's gonna go crazy. Sorry. The Orzaru is dealing with somebody who's kovel al tamid, and that is a right. So as he doesn't want people mad. Here there's a fight. People want their own things. Sorry, the Imam says it doesn't make any sense to lane again because they had a fight and it's not their fault anyway. It's not the fault of the people who left. They were yotze their things anyway to make the whole community lane three parshios because 5 people were dafkaniks and got stuck in a fight. That doesn't make any sense. But even if you say this, even if you say the Orzaru arose in his circumstances where the best thing was obviously for the community to make up the laning, because otherwise, there'll be this ongoing fight about the person who exercised the right to break up the tamid. The Maram Minsk, engaged in the proper thing for his community because 5 dafkaniks shouldn't force everybody to listen to 3 parshios. But you have precedents, and the precedents develop in their own way. So here's the Sefer HaMinhagim. It says the following: Imlo karu parsha machmas shekavlu uvatlu atamid l'shabbos haba yikru shneim de'ein ledaleg shum parsha. Right. So he has this idea, right, which is true. He has a somewhat fuller account of the Orzaru that you're not supposed to skip a parsha. The raya keshachal yontav b'Shabbos, that we don't skip. Right. That's an interesting raya. Yeah, we don't say, okay, you skipped the parsha that was supposed to be on that Shabbos, but not much of a raya. Says the Chain Reinu Regensburg. I don't know the case he saw in Regensburg. He quotes the Marivayel in the Shuvas Arzurua. He says, and the Marimin said 2 but not 3. Lo nirin dvarav beinai, but he says I don't find the Marim Mintz's arguments convincing at all. Right? And for good reason. He doesn't really find the Marim Mintz's arguments convincing at all because they're pretty arbitrary. The only argument the Marim Mintz that's really convincing is that it's too much of a tircha de tzibura. He doesn't seem to be inclined to think of tircha tzibura as a major thing. Okay. That's our background. Those are all the Rishonim that we have on the subject. We have the Arzurua saying, in his case, you have to lane 2 parshios, and you begin with the one you skipped. You have the Marim saying, in his case, we don't have to lane anything at all, because it would be a triple parsha, and you never lane triple parshiot. Okay. Now we get into the later halachas. So the Darkei Moshe, which is right, the Ramah of Moshe Israelis, says, "Katav bar Zarua, imavar Shabbos v'lo kara parsha ru'ilos Shabbos, yikru l'Shabbos haba im parsha ru'ilos Shabbos, l'al yivot lua, ve'enom rim b'zeh avers bano batzol karbano." Okay, so he says that if you skip one parsha, you lane 2. What about 3? He doesn't quote the Marami Mintz. The reason seems to be the Marami Mintz wasn't published. So the Ramah doesn't know about the Marami Mintz. So he quotes the Arzurua and doesn't tell you anything about what happens if it was a double parsha. What happens if it's at the end of a sefer? Any of that? It doesn't show up in the Darkei Moshe. Presumably, the Darkei Moshe thought that the halacha was that you right. He doesn't even say bidlu tamid. Right. He says imavar Shabbat lo karu parsha haru'ilos Shabbos. Right. So the Ramah seems to think simple halacha is that if you missed a Shabbos, you lane 2 parshas in the following Shabbos. And Pashtus, I would say, is if you miss 3 parshas, you lane 3. Right? We go to the Shulchan Aruch. He says, "In bitlu Shabbat achat Okay. I'm sorry, you don't have that. Adam Ariel writes that Darkei Moshe writes as if it's a quote, but it's not a quote. Interesting. Okay. Good point. I don't know. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, right? The Shulchan Aruch leaves it blank, right? The Shulchan Aruch doesn't have this halacha at all because it's all Ashkenaz, so he doesn't, right? So we don't know what the Shulchan Mechaber would say about this at all. And the Ramah says that if you skipped one Kriyas Sibur 1 parsha, the next, right, then you read the next week you read both of them, just quoting the Arzurua, because he doesn't know about the Maram Min. So you'll see I left in all the little letters. Right, you can see that there are 9 footnotes on that one little line of the Ramah, because everybody jumps into it thereafter. But what I would say is, if you're just following Shulchan Aruch, you would say Pashtus is you lane whatever you missed, beginning from when you left off. And the only possible objection you could raise to that really is I'd have to say they didn't see the Maram Mintz. That's one possibility. Or we're medayek that maybe we want to make them square. Maybe the Marin's diak was right that you can't lane 3 parshos, but it's hard to see that, and also very hard to read in the notion that it matters whether you went across a sefer or not. And you could claim that for some reason, if we wanted to really have fun, we could say that the Mechaber Kedarka B'Kodesh follows the Zohar, and therefore believes that it's wrong to lane from one parsha to the other, whereas the Ramah follows the Arzurua. Right? So we really wanted to have fun. We could make it a Machlokas Mechaber, and we say that the Mechaber purposefully left it out, but hard to convince that. Okay, we get to the Ateres Zekanim. The Ateres Zekanim, right here we are in right now we're in the 17th century. Okay, so here, and so he quotes a number of his predecessors. Here we go, right? Right, he starts by quoting Maram Mintz. Right up to here, he quotes Maram Mintz. Right, and he says it seems to make sense that if either of the skipped Shabboses is 2 parshiot, you don't lane it. But now he says, "Benira sheyesh lechalek ben bitlu shtei Shabbosos kol pam parsha achas." There's a difference between if you missed 1 week, which has a double parsha, and if you missed 2 Shabbosos, each time 1 parsha. Then he says, Azai, or nearly, then it seems to me, Shereshus biadam, v'Shabbos haba likros parsha acha shebitel, ima parsha shayach l'oser Shabbos. He says, Marim only says you can't lane 3 parshas. What happens if you miss 2 Shabbos? Can you say, okay, I can't lane 3 parshas, I'm just going to lane the last Shabbos? So he thinks you have the permission to do that, right? As opposed to if it was a double parsha, you don't have the permission at all, because it doesn't make any sense to lane half of last week's half of last week's statement. Okay, and then he says, but he still buys into the idea of the Maramins that you shouldn't lane at the end of you shouldn't lane from one sefer to another. So for our reality, we would say is that once this past week is passed, so we can't make up anything. According to Maramins, we can't make up anything from Shemot once we get to Vayikra. And even if you said, okay, well, that's the Maramins' idea, I'm not convinced by that, you might say, okay, we can't make up more than one week's Parshiyot. Or we could say, Pashtus in the Or Zarua is that you're supposed to make everything up. And the Darkei Moshe doesn't quote the Maramins, so maybe the Maramins doesn't count halacha. Okay, the Magen Avraham says, Avalim hayu beis b'chumaros parsha bilu ain't karim b'Shabbos haba gimel. Right, we never find 3. The ain lomar yikru beis l'chol hapachos ain takana l'chatzayin. Okay, so the Magen Avraham, as opposed to Teres Kedim, says no, you don't even have the right to lane. To lane one missed up week. If you missed it, you missed it. There's no makeups partially. So once you miss more than 1 week, it makes no sense. Whereas the Teres Kedim said that it made sense to allow people to lane more than 1 week. Okay, the Eliyahu Rabbah begins by quoting the position that Ein Ladalek Shum Parsha, and he says, it seems obvious, and it seems to him obvious that if you look at he quotes the end of the Hagos we saw, and he says it doesn't make any sense to say that the Maramid makes no sense at all, and because Maramid makes no sense at all, he thinks that we should lane all 3 parshas. He says V'Knesset Agdola. Here we are. V'Knesset Agdola also tamid l'kaman b'simen reish pei beis heviu divrei haram l'halacha v'lo hiskiru divrei hagos and all. They quoted the Maramins without quoting the Hagos of Haminhagim we saw. And I think they must have missed that Sefer Minhagim which said Maramins is wrong. And I think that the Sefer Minhagim is right, the Maramins is wrong, and you have to make everything up. Okay, so now we can start lining up our positions. You have a position which is attributed to the Or Zarua and is reasonable. Right? If you take the Or Zarua as really stating an absolute principle, you're never supposed to skip a parsha. The Or Zarua doesn't qualify that claim. So if we have that position, you have to make up all the lanings. The Maramins comes up with 2 different ways to avoid that. One is he says you can't skip across Sfarim. So once you get the end of Shmos Vayikra, you can't do it. And secondly, he says you can't lane more than 2 parshas at a time. So once you miss 2 weeks, there's no right. You certainly don't have to lane all of them. As against that, we have machlokas whether if you miss more than 2 weeks, whether you're allowed to lane just 1 week to feel better at making it up, and that seems to be a machloket. And in the very background, conceivably, you have a position of the Zohar that says that you're not allowed to make anything up at all. Okay. So now, then, in the 18th century, you get a line of the Gra. The Gra says, "In bitlu v'chulei, k'moshe kasa b'tfila tav lo hispalo." So the Gra draws an analogy to tefillah. Now, a lot of people seem to take this analogy with enormous seriousness and say what the Gra is saying here is that the obligation to make up Kriyas HaTorah, just like the obligation to make up tefillah, is an individual obligation. And therefore they generate the idea, which is a radical new idea, that every individual has an obligation to make up Kriyas HaTorah completely. And then there's a story, again, I thank Adam for this reference. Kishiyatza Gra miBeis HaAsurim, Kara level Kari Shukra Lefanav Kol Dalet Sidros Midalet Shavuos Asher Yashav. When the Gra was in prison for a while, when he left prison, when he didn't have it laning in prison, he called the Balkare to read all the Sedros that he missed. Okay, so now we can write. This is what we might call the super or Zorua. It's not an obligation on the community; it's an obligation on individuals, and it applies no matter what, right? No matter how many things you learn. Okay, I think that this is a radical overreading of the Gra. All the Gra is saying is you might think that there's an idea of tashlumin by laning, just as there's an idea of tashlumin by tefillah. By tefillah, the tashlumin is for the individual because the chiyuv is on the individual, and by laning, the chiyuv is the tashlumin are on the tzibur because the chiyuv is on the tzibur. The notion that from here you can derive a claim of an individual obligation seems to me very difficult to sustain, and there is, so far as I can tell, no record in the Rishonim whatsoever of any such obligation. The story, I don't know the book at all, but it doesn't say that the Gra did this on Shabbos, and no one thinks you can make up missed landings on Shabbos during the week for reasons that we're not going to go into today. It doesn't even say that he had a that he had a minyan or that he made brachos or anything. Maybe he got out of prison. He wanted to feel that he didn't miss any of Torah, so he had somebody lead all the. I don't read that much of it. That much into it. In context, people often then follow this up by quoting a story about the Rav. When the Rav came in from Boston in YU, if he missed Kriyas Torah he came in on Monday. If he missed Kriyas Torah, then he would call people together and ask them to lean again at Mincha. So that again, that doesn't seem to me evidence at all, because the purpose of Takanas Ezra is that you should not go 3 days without Torah. So I can see very much if you missed laning on Monday, the idea that you have to hear laning on Monday, because otherwise you went 3 days without Torah. How that relates to laning on Shabbos, the whole Parsha, is not obvious to me. As people always point out, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to lane on Tuesday. Certainly doesn't make any. If you miss laning on Thursday, it doesn't make any sense, right? You don't make it up the following Sunday, because you already had 3 days without Torah. So it's really not. It's really not compelling. It's really not compelling at all. Okay, we're going to be hitting the end of our time. You'll see that other issues start arising at this point. Later issues start arising. So one issue that comes up is what happens if you miss Shacharis but you still have time to lane at Mincha? So can you make up Shacharis at Mincha? So the problem there is if you take the notion that Moshe Rabbeinu was metakin Shacharis and Ezra was metakin Mincha, so maybe Mincha is not a time when you can fulfill the kind of Moshe, or maybe not. Then people try and figure out, does it make a difference whether you're mevatel with b'shogeg or b'mezer or b'onis? And then you have to try and figure out what happened in the cases in Cologne and in Erfurt. Was that considered mezid? Well, the people who were mevatel did it b'mezid, but the people who were mevutal did it b'shogeg or b'onis. They couldn't lane. There were people standing in. Right, so that's not, right. So that's an issue. That's an issue as well. And you can see how all those issues line up. So I wanted to finish. I think that's where we should finish by reading a tshuva of Rav Moshe together with you. So Rav Moshe says the following: Bidvar kriyas haTorah, v'adai shetzarich kol adam lishmoa kol hakriya shelichsar lo af teva achat shelo shama. Everybody has to listen to laning really intensely, not to miss even one word. U'b'diavad im chiser teva achat pasuk echad, but if you missed a letter or a word. If we're talking about Monday and Thursday, Rav Moshe says, so then it depends. For each aliyah, did you hear 3 psukim? Right, at the end of the day, the issue is, did you hear 3 aliyahs of 3 psukim each? If you heard 3 aliyahs of 3 psukim each, you're yotze on Monday and Thursday. Okay, but the parsha of Shabbos. When it comes to laning on Shabbos, Hare levad chiyuv shmiyas zayin kruim, in addition to the obligation to hear 7 aliyos, each of which 3 aliyos, right? So then, if you heard 7 olim, each reading 3 psukim from the parsha, you would be yotze that. Right? Mikol makom hayechser lo pasuk shedileg bo hateva v'chol shekain kilo shama pasuk shalem. But you're missing those words in that pasuk. She'ika din mitzad minik kavua b'chol ha'olam Ligmor et Torah b'chol shana v'shana. So Rav Moshe Kedarka B'Kodesh comes up with a completely new idea. There's a din mitzad mina kavua b'chol ha'olam ligmor et Torah b'chol shana v'shana. Everybody has an obligation, not because of Moshe Rabbeinu, not because of a takana, right? Because he knows about the right. He's not going to make any claim like that because he knows that the Israeli minhag was to finish once every 3 years. But there's a minhag kavua b'chol ha'olam to finish the Torah every year. Therefore, Rav Moshe says, if you missed the pasuk, you failed to fulfill this minhag. But you have no eight to do this. That tzibur lo mitrachin lachzor od pam b'shvil yechidim, because the tzibur, you can't force the tzibur to go back because of yechidim. But he says, if there's a minyan shalem that missed words of psukim, so then just like the halacha is, if you missed in laning, you missed the pasuk, everyone has to go back. So if there's a whole tzibur that missed it, right? If there's right, so the people who if there are 10 people who missed a pasuk, they should go back later, and they should, he says, they should go back and lane the places they missed, not in order, but they should just go back and lane the places they missed. So in the very end, it seems to me, Rav Moshe creates a whole new halacha. The fact that he creates this whole new halacha tells you that he doesn't believe that there is any of the previous chiyuvim existed. And here's where I think what I think it comes out. I think that there is a minhag to finish Kriyas Torah every year. There's a minhag for everybody to be in shul and hear all of Kriyas Torah. I think that minhagim often have boundaries built into them, and because we're not matriach the tzibur to go back for individuals, so therefore obviously there are circumstances where we allow individuals not to fulfill their minhag, and the boundary of that is tircha de tzibura. So the question now is, now that we have lots of people who haven't fulfilled their obligation, what's right? So it's not tircha de tzibura because of individuals, it's tircha de tzibura because of the whole group. So I would suggest, really, what comes out probably is as follows: there meikar hadin, certainly in our case, because we've already finished Sefer Shmos, and we have multiple Parshiyos. So it's not right. So it's not clear that even the Or Zarua would think that there's a point in making up partially what you missed, and it's reasonable to say that the Or Zarua would have at some point given up and said, "Look, there's a mitzvah in a muvchar to finish Torah, but that mitzvah in a muvchar doesn't justify the tircha tzibura of making everybody lane 7 parshiyot." So it seems to me very, very hard to argue that there's a chiyuv to make up all the parshiyot. What about making up the parshiyot in Vayikra? Let's say when we start whenever this is over, right? So what about making up the parshiyot in Vayikra? So there again, I think the boundary would be tircha tzibura in the Or Zarua. It's very difficult to claim there's a chiyuv, and I think that the language mitzvah mufchar in the Or Zarua is probably correct. And if somebody wanted to argue a counter, we didn't see the Achronim would pick it up. The Achronim do pick up later the Zohar and say, "Hey, you can't do this at all." I think that's a perfectly reasonable position at all. On the other hand, I think we saw that the Zohar doesn't have so much impact on even on the Achronim. So if you wanted to say that that the Tzibur should make up 1 week, certainly they have reshus to make up 1 week. That seems to be a reasonable position, and I think that it's probably a pastoral decision on the part of the rabbi in the shul whether the tircha de tzibura is a bigger deal, or whether people will feel like to just go back as if nothing happened. We can't do that, so we'll do the one parsha to make up for the 1 week, right? So at least we acknowledge that we missed something. I could see other ways. I could see there's a minhag that doesn't seem to be as widespread as I thought, of laning all of Sefer Dvarim on Shmini Atzeres night. So I could see that there would be optional for people who really feel bad about it. I could see there being optional lanings in the afternoon before, let's say before Shabbos Mincha, or if you don't like Shabbos Mincha, if that seems like a bad time, either at night or let's say in instead of Hashkama, right? There could be a mass laning. And I could see doing that, like we'll do all the Parshiyos in Shmos first, and that's this Shabbos laning, and then we'll do all the Parshiyos in the Ikra next. I could see those are all ways in which you, but my bottom line is I think it's very, very hard to say that there's an obligation to lane even one Parsha, and I think that it's almost impossible to say that we just paskin through Azarua, there's an obligation to lane all Parshiyot, but I think there are lots of creative ways to make people feel that they've missed something, that they haven't missed anything. Okay, any questions before we finish? Okay, I'm really, really grateful to everybody for sticking with me, even though I blew the technology. I think we figured out why it is we've broken, why it is we've done it, and it won't be an issue tonight. So I hope we'll see you all again tonight at 9.
I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Oh, sure, go ahead, Joe.
First, how does the individual's obligation to read the Torah portion each week, Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Targum, fit into this?
That's a great question, and many Achronim have long debates about whether the same thing is true about Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Targum. I think it's much easier to argue that right, because there's no reason to have skipped that.
Right.
The individual Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Targum is not connected to Kriyas HaTorah. It's just your obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think that if you miss Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Targum, I think there's a long tradition that you are supposed to make that up yourself. It's debate about if you make it up in order or not.
If the individuals, though, if the individual members of the congregation have done that, how does that affect the congregation's obligation, if any, to then reread the missing portions in public? Since, at least according to some opinions, the public reading is basically just intended to be one of those 3 readings.
Yeah, I think that would be a clever argument. If everybody in the community had done Shnayim Mikra, so then even if you thought there was an obligation, maybe there wouldn't be. But in practice, I don't know anybody who has held that if an entire community has done, right, if we got up before Shul and we said, has everyone here done Shnayim Mikra and V'Echad Targum, and everyone says yes, I don't know anybody who says that we're not allowed to lane then with a bracha. So I think it's very hard to say that you wouldn't still have a communal obligation.
Second question
Yes.
is, if one does read more than one parsha to make up the missing Parshiyot, how many aliyot does one call, and how does one divide them up?
Right. So that's a great question. Other people have also have addressed that question, right? Do you do it with 7 aliyos and everything else is a hosafa? And then the problem they have is maybe there's an obligation to have 7 aliyos in the parsha that's a chiyuv that week. So maybe you should lane this week's parsha first and then lane next week's parsha. But that means you're going out of order, right? That's right. So those are great questions. And I often say, I married a gabbai, so I wouldn't have to address that kind of question. I am not happy with the idea of going out of order. So probably my suggestion would be, but this is very offhand, and I'm not a gabbai, that the first aliyah be the whole first parsha plus till sheni of the parsha of that week. Right, that would probably be my way of doing it, so that so that you still have 7 in case you're not supposed to lane that. So then you have this, and right. But I think Meikara did. I think probably that I think it's interesting. I haven't seen any tshuvos about what happens if people forgot and laned the wrong parsha one week, and you remember in the middle, right? You think you're supposed to lane Brachis, but really it's Noach. I haven't seen any tshuvos about that. My suspicion is that Meikara din we would paskin that the chiyuv, and as Rav Moshe says, really the chiyuv is to lane 7 aliyos of some psukim, and that probably it's not a bracha levatala as long as you're laning something. It doesn't matter what. So probably it would be fine however you did it. But if that's why I'm not a gabbai, because I think it's probably many of these things. I think it's fine however you did it. But I think that if I were answering the shaila, I would what I would suggest would probably be one long aliyah going till sheni of the second parsha. Okay. Thank you all again.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Okay.